everyone, and welcome to another Friday evening with us at Carta de Vineri. Tonight is a special event as it covers a book by someone who's very, very close to my heart, being from Ploiești, and is presented by someone who's not too far from Ploiești, but with whom we have a lot of rivalry. So, Marian Ivan from Bucharest. So I'll let Nicola Baird introduce Marian, and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Serena. Yeah, so we're incredibly privileged to have Marian Ivan here with us this evening. Marian is director of Bucharest's Ivan Gallery, a commercial establishment founded in 2007, responsible for exhibiting a host of important modern and contemporary Romanian artists, including Paul Negu, whose work we discussed with Yolanda Costida in last month's episode of Carta de Vineri, and the subject of this week's discussion, Geta Brătescu. The gallery has also exhibited the work of Leah Perjovski, please excuse my pronunciation, and Ion Grigorescu, among others, as well as that of emergent artists, the duo Silvia Amansei and Bogdan Armanu, and Anca Benera and Arnold Estefan, as well as Christina David, Stefan Sava and Yulia Toma, seeking to introduce their work to a broader international audience. The Ivan Gallery also represents Romanian artists living and working abroad, such as Bata Sandor and Madalina Zaharia, alongside foreign artists including Elijah Berger, Ross Taylor, and Yaro Varga. The gallery's focus has been on supporting the careers of artists with an articulate, conceptual, artistic discourse, while at the same time documenting and exhibiting internationally the conceptualist and experimental practice of insufficiently known Romanian artists active in the second half of the 20th century, such as Horia Bernia, Simona Runcan, and Florina Kulin. Ivan Gallery was the first to show Geta Brătescu's work within an international contemporary art context and has supported museum and public gallery exhibitions of her work, including at the Kunstmuseum St. Gallen and GL Strand, Copenhagen in 2020, at the Camden Arts Centre and the Venice Biennale Romanian Pavilion in 2017. The latter accompanied by a book, Geta Brătescu Apparitions, published by Koenig Books. In March 2021, the Ivan Gallery opened a new exhibition space in Bucharest inside Atelier Malmaison, a new artistic community hub shared by artist studios, project spaces, and galleries. I hope that's right. And now to briefly introduce Geta before I hand over to Marian, the artist about whom we'll be speaking this evening. So one of the first representatives of conceptualist approaches in Romania, Geta Brătescu, who died at the age of 92 in 2018, was an artist whose oeuvre comprised drawing, collage, textiles, photography, experimental film, and performance. Brătescu spent much of her working life in Bucharest under the communist regime, where she developed a deeply personal practice concerned with themes of identity, gender, and dematerialization. Her aesthetic, lo-fi, handmade, incorporating inexpensive everyday materials, evolved from an attitude towards her studio as both a safe haven and a stage for playful invention. Brătescu was also devoted to literature. Aesop and Medea, Mother Courage, and Faust all played starring roles in her work, functioning as alter egos, conduits for self-expression, and frequently as an oblique form of political subversion. Over the course of her 7-decade career, she published a number of books documenting her daily studio activities and personal experiences of art and travel. And now I think it's about time that I hand over to Marian, who will introduce, I believe, 3 books about Geta, one of which is Apparitions, published by Koenig Books, that I mentioned just now. So over to you, Marian. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I will start talking about Apparitions, which was the catalog of the exhibition at the Romanian Pavilion in Venice Biennale 2017, curated by Magda Radu. And the catalog, apart from the introduction and the text from the curator, the notes from the curator, has for the first time, it was the first time that we had part of Geta Brătescu's texts and essays translated into English.
Mm.
The selection was done by Magda Radu, the curator, and as you probably already know, Geta Brătescu was also a writer. Apart from being a visual artist, she was also a writer. She published during her life 7 books. The first book was published in 1969. It was called From Venice to Venice. It was a traveling journal. So Apparitions, the catalog, has texts from almost all her 7 books from different periods, texts selected by the curator. And it starts with From Venice to Venice, which is also an interesting point, considering Geta Brătescu in 2017 was the first female artist to represent Romania with a solo show at the Venice Biennale. I think it was an important milestone, I would say, and it opened, hopefully it opens the way to other female artists to have more visibility. So this book is very important because it gives us, for the first time, to an international audience, access to Geta Brătescu's essays and part of her books. The books that she published during her life, they were, I think, 7 books. The first one was From Venice to Venice, as I mentioned. Then it was the second book was published in 1985, and it was called Ongoing Studio, Atelier Continu. And part of the essays from Atelier Continu, we have them translated in Apparitions. And then the third book was Atelier Vagabond, like a traveling studio, I would say. Fourth book was actually a novel. So we have, from all these books we have in Apparitions, translated into English. Unfortunately, the book is out of print, I think. Not sure you can still find it in Koenig shops, but maybe in the future we will make it available online through a PDF. Would be, I think, a good idea. So this was quite important because the exhibition in Venice, we got excellent reviews, and it was like a big discovery for everyone to have this survey of, because the exhibition in itself, it went through different periods from the 60s until recent works. So having the catalog as a book in itself, not only as an exhibition catalog with exhibition images, I think it was also, and it is quite important, giving access to all these texts. I would say Geta Brătescu, when you get to read her texts, her books, is as important as a writer as she was as a visual artist. She was writing quite often for a long time. She always had this, she always practiced this exercise of writing. She felt guilty, for example, because I met her in 2007 when I opened the gallery. And I was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with her in her studio. And I would say she felt guilty, for example, if one day she didn't have the time because she was drawing too much. She didn't have the time to stop and write in her notebook. She had these notebooks, large notebooks. We call them caiet studențesc, like a student's notebook.
Yeah.
And she would have this exercise of, she would try to have this exercise of daily writing, keeping all these journals. And also in the in this process of writing, I would like to mention, because I had the chance also to go through her manuscripts, all of her manuscripts. So she would have these notebooks that she would write, but then she would do a transcript to that, and then she would have someone typewrite it. She would typewrite it herself in the 80s, I think. Later on the computer, she would have someone else, or she would do it herself. And then she would have like 2 or 3 transcripts where she would pay attention to the smallest comma, to the smallest detail. You can also see this kind of preciseness in her work. She would never if she would write a text, she would make sure even the layout of her handwriting within the page has a certain composition, a certain structure.
And this kind of reminds me of my Romanian literature teacher in high school, explaining to us the process of creation, and that's exactly how she would present it. You start by making a habit, a routine, and then you start by structuring and restructuring and recreating, and then that's where the attention to detail comes into play. It's quite pleasant to hear you discuss that, because it just brings up fond memories.
Interesting. And for example, the traveling diaries from Venice to Venice, and then it was a really small notebook when she traveled to Paris. She would have drawings, she would have all these, and we have in apparitions, we have pages of the traveling diary from Italy reproduced as a full page, and we could see how she kept it's also with the from Venice to Venice. It's like she wanted to keep a journal of everything that she saw. As you know, she traveled for the first time abroad when she was 39, I think, or 40. Traveling abroad back then, it was difficult. So when I read it and when I saw it, the manuscript, I thought, this is like someone would go there and would try to accumulate as much information visually also, as much as possible, because you would never know when you go back and when you will be able to see again those things. And it's I think it was a great idea to reproduce like full pages where you have the illustrations of certain paintings that she saw or certain churches that she visited, and then with her writing and with her notes. And yeah, this is in apparitions. And apparitions goes from the early days when Geta started writing, very early days when she started writing, until 2017. I think the texts in the book the last ones are quite recent from the last years of her life, which also it's like it gives you a full image of her artistic career apparitions. So in that sense, I think it's for someone who's not familiar with Geta Brătescu's work, both visual or her writings, this would be like the book that they should look for.
Right.
In my opinion. And then in 2018, I think we published, or 2019, we published Game of Forms, which was actually published by Hauser and Wirth Publishers. They are based in Zurich, but they have, I think, they have also in London bookshops. And this one, Game of Forms, we wanted to focus on this series of works with Game of Forms that Geta Brătescu developed since 2007, 2008. And we included texts from her diaries, but we focused on text regarding her artistic practice only. And it's also, again, the way that the book is constructed is that there is a dialogue between the image reproductions of her drawings or collages with Game of Forms and the text that we have in the page next to the reproduction. So we chose the text in a way, in a dialogue with the works reproduced. Again, we understand, going through this, we understand her working process. We understand the whole concept of Game of Forms, because Game of Forms came, as I said, it started in 2007, it's like her last stage of her artistic career. And it came at a time when she was rarely going out of her house. She was spending most of her time in her studios. Again, I have to mention this, Geta Brătescu was someone who was working in her studio daily. At least I would say 7-8 hours a day, at least. She would be someone who, she was someone who didn't have the concept what a bad day means, you know, that today I don't feel like doing this or doing that or going to the studio or working. And I was quite lucky meeting her early on when I started the gallery, because again, seeing someone being so dedicated to the working process also gave me a certain discipline regarding my work as a gallerist. Back then there were very few galleries, I think only 3 or 4 in the whole city, so you didn't have many things to relate to as a job. But seeing someone like Geta and she would ask you constantly what's going on, what shows are in the city, you know, what have you seen interesting? And there was always a dialogue, and was always, when I visited her, there was always this working process going on. And the working process in her studio wasn't only drawing, it was also the writing. And she wrote also about this. She always somehow felt guilty that she was betraying writing for drawing. There is a famous work by her It's also reproduced in Apparitions catalog. It's called Lady Oliver in Her Traveling Costume. It's a photograph of Geta Brătescu with a typewriter machine in front of her. It's like a piece of jewelry, like a big piece of jewelry that she's wearing. And that typewriter, Oliver, that was the brand of the typewriter. It's from the 20s. She got it from her mother. It actually belonged to her mother. And she did that work, which was, it's like one of her most famous works. She did that because she somehow felt, yeah, it's on the cover of the studio. She somehow felt that she's betraying writing, which gives her an enormous freedom. She can go anywhere, she can travel anywhere. That's why Lady Oliver in her traveling costume, because with this typewriter, with her writings, she can travel anywhere, she can go anywhere. It's a freedom that she somehow, she was having this kind of freedom during communism because her mind was free. And she always also spoke about this, how you have to create this mental space where you feel completely free. And she said the studio, it's like a mental space. It doesn't have this physical space where you work, but it has to be the space where you can develop your ideas, the place where you feel like your mind is free and it can go anywhere. Her last book, now I'm jumping to, her last book is titled The Tree from the Neighbor's Yard, Copacul din curtea vecină. In the last years of her life, she wasn't going out much, but she would have this image from her studio's window of the tree from the neighbors. And she would write constantly about that tree, about the birds that she would see. And then you realize if your mind is free, you don't have to have this physical access or to go to many places, or you just have to let your imagination and your mind to go wherever you want to go. And again, parts of this book, The Tree from the Neighbor's Yard, they are translated in Apparitions. So again, that's a good reason to go and read the Apparitions, I would say.
Absolutely.
I've been actually looking up for the links for the books and where I found them, and they're available in the UK. I put the links in the chat or directly on the page.
Thank you. And Game of Forms, I thought it would be important to, apart from all these beautiful collages, all these beautiful drawings, it would be important to have the text where she explains the creative process of this Game of Forms. So she wasn't able to do large works, large installations, as she was doing in the 80s or 70s, even 90s. Now she was working on her working desk and she would be able to do these collages. So she started doing this abstract composition, these geometrical compositions, that they could go on in a process like almost forever. And it's again, for me, it's a performative act of showing that even if you're not able to go and do a big sculpture, even if you're not able, with the means that you have, you can show that your mind is free. You can show that you didn't lose your capacity of, creating all this whole universe of ideas. So this Game of Forms, these forms, she had so many and she created so many in different ways. Most of the times with the found paper, or with leftovers from other works, or it started actually because I met her in that period of time. It started actually with this small cardboard that Mihail Rovanu, who was at that moment the director of the Museum of Contemporary Art and a good friend of Geta Brătescu for a long time. Geta actually knew him since he was a child because she was friends and colleagues with his aunt. So Mihail Rovanu gave to Geta these small cardboards that they were used, I think, in the whole photographic process for separating the negatives or something. And she was fascinated with the materiality of this cardboard. So very often she would work with leftovers or with things with paper that you would normally throw away, or it was just packaging for something. I remember when we participated in 2013, I think, in Freeze London. At the fair, it was such a busy week and I didn't have time to buy any present. And I felt so guilty because, and at the airport, I thought I have to find something for Geta, but she was someone who didn't enjoy, like, how shall I say, a nice, pretty, she would enjoy it in a way, but she preferred things which are practical or which make her laugh, or would be something that would be funny, or she would find a function to. So I couldn't find anything. She wasn't into perfumes or I found this set of gloves which you use for the oven.
Mm-hmm.
And they were in I would say royal colors, red, blue, and white, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Also with, I think it was the portrait of the queen at that time. And when I gave them to Geta, she immediately put them on and she said, I have an idea of an artwork. And she with Stefan Sava, who's also an artist that the gallery works with. And we will talk about Stefan very soon. She did a series of photographs with Stefan, and she did a large work, which we actually showed in London at House and worked with that present with the gloves, which were for the oven, and Jetta never used them for the oven because wasn't cooking much. And then even the packaging, the box, she did a series of collages with and they are reproduced in a game of forms in the book at page 92 and 93.
Wow.
So she was quite happy that she found a different utility to the present I gave her. So most of the time in her artistic process, it would be about transforming something that it's not useful anymore or has a different function. Sometimes it can be even a domestic function into art.
Just giving it a different life, I suppose,
Yes.
and
Yes.
seeing how it can perform.
Yes. Exactly. And I mentioned Stefan, and now we will go to the third book that we discussed tonight, the catalog that we had in 2020 when we did the exhibition in Kunstmuseum St. Gallen. And we did the solo show with Geta Brătescu, and the catalog of the exhibition focuses on her films and videos. These films and videos, because in her practice, Geta Brătescu tried almost every medium except for painting, which she found too conventional. And she experimented so much and she was very much attracted by doing films. The first two ones that she did were together with Ion Grigorescu. He
Mhm.
was the cameraman, the studio and the hands. They were both featured in at Tate Modern last year. They had, I think, for the whole year, a whole room dedicated to Geta Brătescu, and they had both films in that room. And then again with Ion Grigorescu, she did two more videos in 2004 and 2006. Ludus and yeah, that's Hands Le Mans, where the hands become a character um, in the whole film. We only see her hands playing and working and drawing on the working table.
This is really making me laugh because this weekend I've taught a very little Romanian girl how to play this, and she didn't know, and it became quite a family activity because it's something that's not necessarily well known in the UK.
I think it's getting less known also in Romania, unfortunately. So yeah, we see her here again from the hands film, and then
Amazing expression of the hands. Every single one of these seem to be
the
natural and kind of normal poses, but at the same time, when you look at them, they just
they're like a character in itself. It
yeah.
becomes like the main. She said she was very much inspired by Chaplin. She was a big fan of Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah.
She wrote also about Chaplin.
I've seen her
Yeah,
described as an artist of the hands. I suppose that also refers to her sort of, yeah, not only featuring but using her hands.
she said that the hand is doing the deed, you know.
Mm.
Between the mind and the eye, the hand is the one who's doing it.
Yeah.
Your
It's
thing.
it's also important from an artist perspective. It's actually one of the most difficult elements to paint. If you know how to paint the hands, generally
That's
speaking,
true.
you're really good.
Although Jetta didn't paint, did she?
No.
Drawing key to her practice.
Uh, Actually, the subtitle of the film is uh, for the mind, the hand is drawing the portrait of the body, something like that.
Mm.
No, she didn't paint. She thought it was too conventional. She always tried to experiment new mediums. For me, I think it was also kind of a form of resistance.
Mm-hmm.
It could be, although Jetta was trying to avoid like any putting herself into a feminist movement. But for me, I think it's also kind of a feminist manifesto. When people expect you, when you do something and it's become successful, people expect you to do the same thing, and and
Mm-hmm.
change and try it in a different medium, do it in a different way. I see it, for me, it's also a form of resistance of what it means to be a female, what it meant back then to be a female artist, and what people expect you to do.
Mm.
So
It's also part of being an autodidact. It's continuous learning and continuous revisiting and repetition of the same thing until perfection.
And with drawing, she started also in the 90s, these drawings with the eyes closed,
Yes, I was reading about those.
which she said, between the mind and the hand, you have the eye. You know, if you close your eyes, the hand has to do what the mind tells.
Mm-hmm.
And I met her in 2007. She was doing this series of drawings with the eyes closed. And then in 2008, I remember I went to her studio and she had just finished this beautiful series of drawings with the eyes closed, but they were so beautiful. They looked like they were done with the eyes open. And she said, you know, I want to stop at this moment to do the drawings with the eyes closed, because it's not anymore the mind, you know? It's the hand goes so easily and goes so easy. And that's why I think also that's also the moment, the same period when Game of Forms came. That's the moment when she said, you know, I've done this. I've done enough, you know, to exhaustion. I have to move from this subject, because the drawings, they were not abstract. The line was, in the beginning, the line was quite, how shall I say, tensed. You could feel the tension trying to, yeah, that's a series of drawings. And it's interesting, if we can stop for a minute, this series on the, we don't see them so well, unfortunately, but they are reproduced in the catalog from Kunstmuseum St. Gallen, the one with films and videos. So those drawings, there are two drawings. The basic line is done with the eyes closed, and the rest of the drawings is done with the eyes open. But the background, the black background that you see, it's not black paper. It's paper that Geta painted with black ink. The attention to details that she had in the whole process, every work, everything is done so precise and with such attention to details. And this series, it's called, I think, Capriccio, the one. That's a beautiful work. That's a really beautiful.
yeah.
Again, constructed in this kind of sequences. You see the story in different sequences. It's a less known work by Geta. From I think from the 90s. This again, it's called The Adventure. It's pages of a French dictionary, Lagus. And then her, on one part, it's her small photograph with Lady Oliver, and on the other part, you see the reflection on this kind of metal foil. So it's like a self-reflection. Again,
I think that's my favorite so far. This one and the previous one have attracted me the most. What's your favorite
my favorite,
of all of her works?
difficult to say. There is a work, it's a large circle, 1 by 1, I think 1 meter by 1 meter, which is done with very small, tiny cigarette paper, Carpazzi cigarette paper. That was a famous brand, very cheap, like Gitan, very strong and very cheap. It was popular during communism. So this Carpazzi brand, Carpazzi, was written with very thin
Cursive.
handwritten with the blue, but a very light, not blue, sorry, red, very light
Red.
red. So what Jetta did, she would smoke like half or less than a half of a cigarette, and then she would take out the paper, she would flatten it, and then she had these huge compositions where you have, like, I think hundreds of these they are put together, so you see only the smoked edge
smoky
and the
line.
Carpazzi and the writing with Carpazzi. This is one of my favorites, but it's very hard to have a favorite when her work is so amazing.
Well, and especially because her, you know, her career spanned so many decades as well. It was incredible. She was
But,
working right up until
but
the end.
what's interesting, if you go to any decade and you look at the work, it's not like you would say, oh, you know, in this period, you could see that, you know, she was a bit trying something else, or she was, as a curator said, you know, to each decade that you look, even starting with the 50s, everything is good. Not good, but at a certain level. So there is only 1989. It's a year when we don't have so many works by her. We have a series of works called The Bird Burn. But apart from that, not so much. But I think that's because that was the year that her mother died. So I think it was a period of time when she had to struggle with certain personal issues. But there are so many works which I like from Geta. But in general, I like this, as we call them leporello. This kind of the adventure is this kind of that you can expand. It's something very small in a tiny box, but then it can go monumental. And she has similar works like this, which are reproduced in the book with the films and videos. There are two long stripes. One is black and one is red. The work is called the Ritualic Books, the books of rituals. And you can see them coming out of these tiny boxes. You have like 3 meters long, but you could see that there is even more. So it's like ongoing. It could go on forever, you know.
It's like one of those magician boxes that keeps there's more and more, and the more you pull, the more there is to pull out.
Yes, full of surprises.
Marian, you spoke very beautifully about the books, and you gave us really good stories about Geta's books, and you've told us some beautiful stories about her creative process, but you haven't really told us about yourself and your relationship with Geta. How did you come to meet her? How did you come to represent her and exhibit her work? What was she like to work with you touched upon this side of the question a little bit earlier, but what was she like to work with in this type of capacity?
She was very demanding and very professional. With Geta, there was no, how shall I say, nuances. It was black or white. You know, you always had to have the conversation on a certain level.
There must be a ployish characteristic. I feel like you're describing myself.
And I was quite lucky because I met her very early on when I opened the gallery. Ion Grigorescu, the artist, he introduced me to Geta. He invited me to, Geta had a small exhibition at the Art Academy, had a small exhibition room on close to the Art Academy, and Geta had a small drawing show. Drawing in 4 minutes, it was called. And there were drawings from different periods. And Ion Grigorescu said, would you like to meet the artist? And he introduced me to Geta, and Geta was sitting on a chair because she was a bit tired, I think, from the whole opening. She was all dressed in black, and she had this strong red lipstick. And her husband, who was tall and thin, was standing next to her. And when I introduced myself and I said that I have a small gallery space in the city center that I just opened, she was looking at her husband, not looking at me, and said, could you please give my card to this young gentleman? She was like a diva. And something that I noticed back then, and it continued to interest me somehow is that if Geta, she had a certain energy. If she would enter a room, even in London, even in Bucharest, anywhere, she was tiny. She was, I think, 154, something like this, or less than 150. She would immediately have this capacity to get everyone in the room look at her. I don't know how. Kind of magnetism. And everyone to notice her. And then it took me quite a while until I found the courage to contact her, and I spoke with her. And she was very polite, and she said, because I said, I don't know if you remember, we met like 6 months ago, and she said, I might be 82 years old, but I remember perfectly whom I met and when I met. And she invited me to her studio. And back then I had a small, tiny space in the city center. It was like just one room, not so big. And I used to invite young artists and show them the space and say, we should do an exhibition. And they would say, oh, this is too small. I had one artist, she came in and said, where's the entrance to the gallery? This might be the hallway. Where's the... So I invited Geta, and Geta looked and she said, I have 3 ideas of a show. You know, we could do this or we could do that. And she said, this looks like exactly if you go on Rive Gauche, on left side of in Paris, all the galleries, you know, they have this kind of spaces. And she was quite fond of it. She said, well, this is something that I like. So we started working immediately together. I also think I met her at the right time, because there was a moment, you will find this in Apparitions book, where she felt her studio was full of works. Her studio, she had a lot of ideas, but she wrote that she feels like she's in a boat and she's on a lake, and she's going further and further away from the attention of her audience. And she said, my studio is like a lake full of dead fish, you know, nobody's paying attention to what I'm doing. So I think it was also a good moment, but it was definitely a very good moment for me, because I learned a lot. I learned a lot. When you see something, you have to talk about what you see, you have to discuss, you have to have an opinion. She gave me a lot of trust and confidence in my taste. She said that was something that she told me early on. She said, you have a good taste, you have to be confident in your taste, you will do a good job. And that was very important. But in the same time, she was very demanding. She would always want to know, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to put that work in a certain way? What's the concept behind? What's the idea? Does this idea still stand, you know, apart from this exhibition or apart from this representation? Or she would never do something, how shall I say,
just flippantly,
sloppy or just loosely, or never.
And just really had to all come back to the story and the concept and
So
still stand up.
that somehow forced me to have a certain standard early on. And I'm really grateful to her for that, because otherwise there was no way of learning how to do this job. There were no other galleries where you would say, I go there for 2 years and I learn how to do it.
It sounds like above or beyond being an artist and a writer, she was also a fairly
You're right. You're right.
good mentor.
She had, although she hated the idea of being a mentor, she had a special, an amazing, how shall I say, understanding how the system works. Even though she was 80 years old, she would say, oh, if we do a show there, that's something too peripheric, you know, that won't bring enough attention. Or if we do a certain show in a different place, she said, this is really important. This is what we should do. She would say it's very important to have this type of galleries, young galleries like you in Bucharest that would connect with other galleries abroad. And I was always amazed. She had such an understanding of each one's role in the whole universe of art. On the whole scene, she would be like, she wouldn't be someone who would say, oh, it's enough that I'm an artist, you know, I don't need the curator, I don't need the gallerist, I don't need the art critic, I don't need. She would be someone who would say, no, we need to have the gallerist, we need to have the art critic, we need to work with the curator. Museum has a certain role, the gallery has a certain role. Me as an artist, I have a certain, you know, I have to. The way that she understood and navigated through this, for me, that was amazing. And I had also the contrary. I had certain propositions from people saying, oh, we should do a show in a certain place. And I would go to Geta and she was always polite. She had this kind of education before the war, I call it education. From a good family, she was coming from a good family from Ploiești, upper middle class. So she would be very polite, she would think about it, but then she would be very firm and she would say, no, this is not a good idea. That's not a good place and we shouldn't do that. Again, this kind of politeness, I learned to appreciate it in time. She would accept certain invitations. She would, if someone would call or write, she would say, okay, please come see me in my studio. But the moment that you would go there and you would say something which was completely mediocre or out of context, so she would cut the conversation immediately. And she would stop it. And I remember the first meetings that I had with her in her studio. She was sitting at her desk and I would be placed, she would have to turn to look at me and she would barely turn, you know, she would be like, look straight, and from time to time she would be like, so you had to be, how shall I say, you had to gain access somehow to her knowledge and to build up this communication with her as an artist. She wanted always to keep the conversation to a certain level. I cannot imagine anyone doing small talk with Geta. So
Seriously, stop it now. So, go on, Nicola.
No, sorry, I was just wondering, because you've spoken about her kind of awareness of the whole sort of art world ecology, but would you agree that she also believed in art being a social practice that kind of expanded beyond the realms of merely the art world? And because I saw a statement where she'd said that you know, although many aspects of her work were very playful, she spoke about art as being very serious, and that that an artist must be responsible, and yeah, quite a succinct.
the motto of the catalog of the book with the films and videos from 2020, it's called Art is a Serious Game. And this social aspect of her work, I think it's best represented by a work that she did in 1974. It's called Magnets in the City. She wrote also a manifesto for this work, where she says a huge magnet should be placed in the main square of the city. And then the whole energy of the city will change. Cars will be drawn to this magnet. Clocks will change, time will change. And then smaller magnets would be placed in houses. And then everyone's activity will change. And then even smaller magnets will be in kindergartens and children would play with them. And to do this in 1974, I think it's such a political statement. And it shows the power of art, you know, how it can change everything around. And how, you know, it can defy even the system, such a totalitarian system. You know, you place this huge magnet and then you change. You disrupt everything. So this is what you can do as an artist, you know.
Yeah, and continue to inspire. So jumping from 1974 to 2018, one of the things that I've come across, and I'll share it. Just give me a second. Whilst we were preparing for today, is an article in the art newspaper in the UK, advertising take the Circle Line with Geta Brătescu, and the Circle Line is one of the lines of the tube in London. They actually did a special event with her art, and I find that absolutely fascinating, considering how little she's been known at the beginning of her career. Was there any reason why her renown essentially only came at the last stages? Was that linked to social Romania opening borders or anything like that, or what
No,
do you?
it's more connected with the art market. So, you know, it's more connected with this kind of cycles that you have. So after the financial crisis in 2008, when the art market also crashed, like the financial market, before 2008, like 2006, 2007, you would have young artists on a heap, you know, like with crazy prices, and everyone was praising the young artists. And then it came a moment where the art market crashed, and then curators started paying attention to older female artists. Like, there was even an article in Financial Time in 2010, I think. OWA, old female artist. It's like YBA, young British artist, you know. That was the next thing. And one of the first curators who started this trend was Adriano Pedrosa. He's Brazilian. He's curator of this edition of this year of Venice Biennial. And Adriano did in London in Frieze Masters a whole section of the fair. It was called Spotlight. It was the first edition of Frieze Masters, and he invited me with Geta. He did a whole section with older female artists, less known internationally. And it somehow created a new move, and the market, the art market, somehow followed the trend which Adriano started. And people realized and it's even now we realize we didn't, the rise of OWA. People realized we don't pay enough attention to these older artists who worked all their lives. There's another artist, Carmen Herrera, that she also worked, Ligia Pape also worked for all their lives, and no one, that's Carmen Herrera, no one paid attention to what they were doing. They were in the artistic circles. Everyone knew about Geta. When I opened the gallery before I met Geta, there were at least 2 people who told me, oh, I have to take you to meet Geta Brătescu. You would really like her work. But curators, for example, in the 90s and in 2000, more in 2000, because in the 90s, curators were not traveling to Romania because of the events in 1991. In 2000, when curators were traveling, foreign curators were traveling to Romania, they were interested only in this kind of very direct political art, where they would see like a connection with the communism and Geta was someone who was doing this, always did these beautiful works that in the beginning it's very hard to go beyond this kind of beautiful compositions and see it took someone who comes from a different culture than Western Europe, like someone from Brazil, like Adriano Petroza, to come with a fresh eye and realize, this is something we should pay attention to. Because, for example, the textile collages of Geta that everyone is crazy about now, back then they considered it somehow too, how shall I say, feminine in a way. Although it's a form, again, I would say it's a form of feminism, working with this kind of soft material that people would expect you as a woman to work with. It's again a form of resistance in a way. So she also wrote, I think we have it in apparitions, she also wrote about this, that she's enjoying all the attention, all the international attention, but it's coming a bit too late. She said, she wrote about this, it's somehow abstract, she cannot enjoy it. She said, I just enjoy being in the studio and working. In the past, I would be much more grateful, but now it's something that I enjoy, but it's somewhere, it happens somewhere else, far away from me, far away from the studio. It's a pity.
Yeah.
It's a pity.
Yeah, alongside with the fact that essentially I can see her being celebrated. You mentioned Financial Times article in 2012, but Financial Times wrote a series of articles across many years on Geta, and they're not the only ones that do that, and they seem to be wanting more. There's more to rediscover. There's more to talk about. I think it's important that we keep that conversation going, considering how much she's brought to the art scene.
I agree. And there is still much more to discover about her work. The problem with Geta Brătescu's work, she's an artist who lived all her life in Romania during communism. If she would have left Romania and lived in Paris or London, it would be a different kind of attention. And it's very difficult. Her work is very complex. It goes, as you Sorina mentioned, that we mentioned earlier, it goes into so many references. You have this literature references like Mută Curaj, like Medea. You have all this part with collages, the performances, the films, the videos, all this, it's quite complex and very difficult to, how shall I say, to navigate through. Sometimes for, I would say, someone who comes and was somehow formed in a completely different
culture and background. You must have read my
Yes.
mind, because this was going to be my invitation for you to just talk a little bit about her inspiration from her books and the literary figures. You mentioned Medea. I was going to mention Aesop and Faust, among others. But yeah, perfect timing.
Medea was the series with Medea comes almost not in the same time, but almost in the same time with Faust. Medea and Faust are one of the most important series in her work. And Medea, she did in drawings, she did in lithographs, she did in textile, colored textile, sewing on textile, but then she did it also on white, not colored, and the white ones are in Tate collection. Actually, you could see them there in the permanent display. So she said she liked this. She wanted to do Medea in all these stages, like to, how shall I say, to exhaust all possibilities of doing it. And she drew the portrait of Medea not as a physical portrait, but as a sign. she came to this ovuloid form shape that looked, she said it's a sign, actually it's not, and has so many different references, and very hard, it's still hard for me to understand the whole Medea. It goes even further. It comes with certain memories that she had. She did an installation called No to Violence. I don't know if you know it. It's a big installation. It was in the Camden Art Show in London. It's in the Moderna Muzeum in Ljubljana collection. And then it's a drawing from that series, and then from that drawing, the whole Medea series starts. But she also saw the film of Pasolini, Medea, which she didn't like, but she somehow again had an idea what she wanted to do. And then there was an image that she saw, and she turned it around. She realized it's like an island, the shape of an island seen from above, Medea. And it's very, how shall I say, it's very complex to understand the whole. I mean, what she wrote about Medea is that this, you know, she's someone who goes from love to revenge, to complete revenge. She's a woman who conquers new territory. She's a refugee from, kind of a refugee from Georgia, because she was in Georgia initially, and then she runs away from her family, kills her brother in the process because she was in love. And then because she's betrayed, she conquers a new territory in Greece. She becomes, you know, she goes there. So it's very political, I think. And then in Greece, she's betrayed by her husband. So as a revenge, she kills her children and poisons the new wife. So she says women have this power in themselves, you know, to go from, and as I said, it's very complex, very difficult to understand. If you think also what women were going through in the 70s, in Romania with abortions and illegal abortions, and I think it's very much connected to that.
Well, I have, yeah, I was going to say I have a connected question which explores a bit more the her use of the female body in her work and works relating to motherhood. You mentioned the Medea series and also the Mothers series. Motherhood as being the root of all creativity. And again, I came across another quote where Geta says, "Feminism is a uniform. Femininity is a specific energy. It is an aura, a light that is a gift which enriches the world." So yeah, just to sort of delve a bit more into the sort of complex, the complexity of her uses and beliefs in kind of feminism and I suppose feminist practice. And
it's she has another series, it's called The Mothers, which goes to Goethe, to Faust. There were these spirits that they were living you know, underground. And she said, and she also drew them, she said they were witches, but in a sense, good witches. Yeah, we have also, this is one of the mothers, Mume. They would, if you upset them, you know, they could do harm. They have this power within themselves, you know, to harm you if you do something against them. So it's always about this female power and how strong she goes to these strong characters that go through history, like Mută Curaj, you know, or Medea, or even Dido. She has a series with Dido. It's always going through war, going through different conditions, conquering a new territory, being forced to move to a new territory, being forced to go from one place to another, and then build a life or be able to continue your life in this new territory, going through all this. So I think she was 20 when the war ended. I think all the things that she encountered early on in her existence, because as I said, with No to Violence, which goes to Medea, with No to Violence, which goes to Mută Curaj, because the No to Violence, it's actually the shape of the carriage from Mută Curaj. Mută Curaj was going with this carriage through the and selling, what was she selling? I think alcohol to the soldiers, no? She wrote in, and we have this text in Apparition. She said when she was in Ploiești, in high school, I think, her literature teacher forced them to go to the hospital and to read to the wounded soldiers. And she remembers there was a horrible smell of sweat and blood. But she remembered, apart from the smell, she remembered this this military blanket, like black felt. And then she used this black felt in the installation of No to Violence. And then from the drawing of No to Violence, it goes to these pre-Medeic drawings, which transform into the whole Medea series. So I think it's also related of all this. And then she was telling me that when when they were in Ploiești, they went to Valea Călugărească because they had the house there in the vineyard. And they were trying to hide because the Russians entered the city, and they were trying to hide. And she was telling me that they were covering their faces with charcoal, I think, or with ashes. So this process of covering the face, you see it in many of her works, and painting her face with a different color. So all these events, if you asked her, she would say, "Oh, I was so young, I went through this, you know, with living fully." But for sure, it left such a strong, you know, impact.
Mark, yeah.
Mark, yeah. Yeah, that's the word.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that surprised me when I came to the UK, and I think that kind of speaks of her work and why she's so appreciated, is the fact that there's a huge cultural difference in terms of education. Simply because the kind of education that we received in the state schools, so it wasn't anything fancy, it wasn't anything, you know, paid for or anything like that. Here would be classed as posh. Because I dared to mention, I remember in the office at one point, Mephistopheles, just referring to somebody being really teasy type of person, and they just turn around and say, "Oh, you must be posh. Who's Mephistopheles?" and stuff like that. So it is a different world that is opened through her work that everybody around here absolutely wants to explore and wants to immerse themselves into, and they don't necessarily have access to, because the public school here, or actually the state school is not exactly, it's not does not have the same curriculum that we would have, so it doesn't give you the same dimension of culture and references.
All these references, yes, historical references and literature references. But literature was always very important for her. That's why I think she incorporated these references in her works, and writing was also incorporated in her works. And it's good that we talk about these three books, especially about apparitions, but also the other ones. The catalog with the films and videos has contributions from artists that Geta Brătescu collaborated with, like Ion Grigorescu, Ștefan Sava. The Game of Forms again gives us access to this text of hers translated into English. And I think it's the moment that we read them, you know, we appreciate her as a writer as much as we appreciate her as a visual artist.
Are you working on any more of her projects or any
How do you
projects
know that?
involving Geta? I'm just asking. You read
Yeah,
my
it's
mind
something
earlier.
that
I'm only returning the favor.
it's something that we want to do for a long time. We are working on a project on a critical edition of her traveling diaries. We would like to put her traveling diaries all together, but to have a critical edition where people would try and analyze and comment on the inspirations that she had on her travelings. And the things that she came across, and we would like to introduce also more images, photographs from her traveling. She was also, I have to mention this one more thing. She was, because it was very difficult to travel in that period of time, and also they would also, the secret police would force you to sign this kind of agreement. After you traveled, like to give a statement of what you did. So I think with Jetta, and partly she confirmed that to me. She started when they said you can go to Italy, for they approved her trip to Italy. She said from the beginning, and she wrote, she said, but I would like to keep a journal of my, and to publish it when I come back. And I think it was, she would always do this when she traveled. She would say, I want to keep a journal and I want to publish it when I come back of my travel. There was a way of avoiding being asked to go and write, to give a statement of this, whom have you met? Where have you been? What have you seen? You know? She would say from the beginning, this is what I want to do. I will write everything down and I will publish it when I come back. I think it was very, very smart.
So would this be a new publication project you're mentioning?
Yes,
The diaries?
yes. So we want to do this traveling diaries in critical edition for sure, with a foreign publisher. Hopefully in 2 years it will be out. And we want to translate also, she has a novel that she wrote. She has also a lot of short stories that she was very fond of. And I very much look forward to have them published and translated. I think Jetta would be very happy to have her books translated and published.
Definitely. And if ever you're interested, we do have a friend in another part of Romania that has his own publishing little projects. And I call them little, but it's more about boutique kind of approaches involving AR. So augmented reality into books. So it might actually be very
That would
much
be interesting.
up Jetta's street to
Yes,
explore a
yes,
new
yes, yes.
medium.
That would be very interesting. I would be happy to get in
I'm happy to put you in
touch.
contact.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Carry on.
No, I was just going to go to the next question unless
Yeah, that's fine. No, go for it.
Just, yeah, I was interested in, we've spoken about what other projects you might have coming up involving Jetta's work, but what are you working on otherwise at the moment? What's on show at the gallery? Either of the spaces?
We have a show in the gallery with an artist from Jetta's generation. She's someone that very, very few people knew about. Even I didn't know about her. Adela Petrescu. She was the wife of Radu Petrescu, who was a famous writer in Romania. Famous. She was a very good writer and very much appreciated in the 70s and 80s, but in certain circles.
Mhm.
He died very young. He was 52 when he died. So Adela Petrescu was his wife. She was born in 1927, almost the same generation as Geta. I know that they knew each other, but Geta was somehow, I think, closer with Radu Petrescu somehow. And nobody knew she was an artist. And we have an exhibition in the gallery. It's quite a large survey of works from different periods. And it shows, so you have these works, these paintings on cardboards, because in the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, she didn't have access to canvas. It was also about this lack of materials, this lack of means of production. So even this cardboard, it was very difficult to find. You had to queue at the artist union, and she wasn't a member of the artist union. So a friend of hers would come, who was a member, would come with her, and her daughter told me, Oxandra Grigorescu, who's also an artist, she said, I remember as a child queuing at the artist union store with my mom, so she could get with their friend, that she could get this cardboard. And you have them painted on both sides, because she didn't have enough, so she would paint them. All of them are painted on both sides. And only in 77, I think, again through a friend, she had access to canvas, so she would start doing these large paintings on canvas. And it's amazing to see this woman who was painting these small cardboards, cheap cardboards, then goes in this huge surface, and how well she controls that surface. So imagine if she always had access to this kind of materials.
Yeah.
That's why I think when you look at Eastern European artists, especially the ones who worked and produced work during communism, you have to look in a different way, with a completely different way of trying to understand the work.
Yeah.
You have to understand through the context of their lives, to the context of their means of production, through the political context. There are so many layers, which I think it's complicated, very, very complicated.
Yeah, it is very difficult to actually explain this to somebody who hasn't lived through that kind of situation, because there's no point of reference. So to visualize the whole of it and to understand the context becomes extremely difficult unless you have somebody who can teach you and guide you along the way.
Even for me, it's difficult to understand that you had a close circle of friends, but within that circle of friends, you would later find out that one of them was giving like notes to the secret police about you and what was happening in your studio or in your house or in your life. And it's very often the case that the closest person to you would be someone who was collaborating.
Also an informant. Yeah.
And then I would ask Geta, because she was always somehow, keeping a distance from the rest. And she was like, oh, I was always busy. I had my studio, I had my family. But I think there was also a way of protecting yourself and trying, to avoid any. With Adela Petrescu, it's again a case of someone from the same generation. Geta wrote in her book that this is the generation of post-war knights. She said they had so much to give, but the door closed too soon for them. So,
Last question then, Marian, for the evening. Sorry,
yes, some of them, unfortunately, some of them actually ended up in prison in those days, in the 50s.
Yeah.
One last question then for tonight, Marian. It's a question that we ask all of our guests, and sometimes it's the hardest question of the evening. Can you please recommend us a book for the Cartea de Vineri project. So just remind those who are not familiar with the project, it's either we're looking for either books by Romanian authors or books that are somehow connected to Romania. What would you recommend that we read?
I would go into something more specific. There is a book. There are two books which I would like to recommend if it's possible. One is written
Oh, as a
by,
one-off, as a special, you can have two.
so one is written by Madalina Brașoveanu. She's an art historian, and it's called, I don't know how to translate this correctly because it's such a beautiful title, O singurătate destul de zgomotoasă. And it's a book that I highly recommend about the avant-garde, neo-avant-garde movement in Transylvania in the 70s and 80s.
A fairly loud loneliness.
Noisy.
Yeah.
Loneliness, yeah. It's such a beautiful title. And the other one is about the art, written by the art historian Irina Karabaș. And I'm actually trying to find a way to force her to translate this book into English. It's called The Socialist Realism Facing the Past. Realismul socialist cu fața spre trecut. It's a book that I highly recommend also. Very, very interesting read. It goes through the history of visual arts in Romania in the late 40s and early 50s. So it's very interesting, I would say. Geta is also mentioned in the book. So
And let's hope you
Fabulous.
persuade her to get it translated then, because otherwise I can't read it.
Yeah,
I
you're gonna
realized
have
that
to.
I hopefully when we will talk again in the future, Irina's book will be translated.
Mm-hmm.
You're gonna have to learn Romania after all, Nicole. Apologies.
No, it's something I need to do.
No worries. Well, this has been really, really a journey. So thank you very much for making time for us, Marian. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
And
Likewise.
we're looking forward to hearing more about your future projects, and hopefully we can invite you back for the next publication.
I look forward to that.
For those of you who follow this little project of Carta de Vine, we invite you back again for a live on the, let me check if I have the date right, 29th of November, where we're going on a journey in search of Romania with Emeritus Professor of Romanian Studies, Professor Denis Delatant, who's going to come and join us on the project. So looking forward to that. And in the meantime, we hope you have a lovely rest of your evening and a lovely weekend. And again, thank you very much, Marian.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Bye-bye.
Marian.
Thank you.
Bye now.